Hello, everybody, and welcome to mycountylink.com as we have another episode of Talk of the Town, where we take a look at people, places, and events that occur not only in Greenville and Darke County, but also around West Central Ohio. I'm Alex Warner, along with videographer Nick Schmidt. Today we've come to the Garst Museum here in Greenville, and with us is Caitlin Clark, and we're certainly glad to have Caitlin with us today. We're going to cover a wide variety of topics, not only dealing with the museum, but also some of the things going on here, and a book that she's put out that I think we're going to find quite interesting. So first of all, Kate, welcome to mycountylink.com.
Thank you. I'm so excited.
Yes, I think this is going to be a great show for everybody out there. Let's talk a little bit about your background. If I remember, you're from Arcanum, is that true?
Yeah, I graduated from Arcanum High School, 2014.
2014, yeah, still a young thing, right? Yeah. Anyhow, and so you've always lived in the Arcanum area?
Well, yeah, I grew up somewhat in Ohio. I was born in Nashville, Tennessee, though. So I spent my first 3 or 4 years down south.
Okay, I thought I heard a little accent in there someplace.
Some people do.
Some people do. Anyhow, so then after you graduated from Arcanum in 2014, then did you go on into college then, I assume, or what?
Yeah, I went to school and I got a bachelor's degree in abnormal psychology.
Yeah, where'd you go to school?
Oh, where didn't I go to school?
Oh, okay.
I went to 5 different universities.
Really?
I wanted to study people, not just in the classroom, but outside too. So,
okay, well, I don't know if we want to go too much further into that or not.
I know.
But abnormal psychology.
Oh, yeah.
And you ended up here at the museum. How long have you been here at Garst Museum then?
Since July of last year. So yeah, we're coming up on 1 year.
Yeah, so what's your official title or job responsibilities out here at the Garst?
So I am the Capital Campaign Manager officially, but I wear a lot of other hats as well.
Yeah,
So.
okay. And I hear you're going to have another hat in October, right?
Oh, yeah. I'm getting married in October.
Yeah, she's married. Another one of the locals has kind of stayed around and is involved out at Shawnee Prairie, and that'd be?
Yeah, Mitchell Pence.
So we got to be Kate Clark Pence then,
Kate
right?
Clark Pence.
Kate Clark Pence. Well, anyhow, let's talk a little bit. I mean, you've been here then, you say, since last July, so not quite a year, and gotten involved in a lot of different things. But one thing you did before you even got here, because I assume you started on this book way before you arrived here.
Oh, yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about this, because this looks like an interesting booklet, which I assume is for sale here.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, sale here at the Garst Museum bookstore. Let's talk a little bit about this and how you became involved in this, Kate.
Sure. So I've studied Lewis and Clark since I was about 13 years old, of quite a long time, over half of my life. So that interest started to snowball, and it really started to catch some attention of the local historians here in town.
Okay.
So they asked me to write a newspaper article about how Lewis and Clark met and how their meeting and their time here in Greenville made the expedition a success.
Now let's say something though. You're Kate Clark.
Yes.
Lewis and Clark, so there has to be a connection.
Yes, I am a member of the Clark family. I'm not a direct descendant of William Clark himself, but I am a member of the Clark family. So
Very
yes,
good.
I do have a personal connection, but I didn't learn about that connection until after I started studying them.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Had no idea.
So anyhow, Lewis and Clark were here at Greenville, Fort Greenville, and they were here for the signing of the Treaty of Greenville, correct?
Yes, they were both stationed here in 1795. They actually worked together, though, for about 6 months-ish. So this book kind of covers how they met for the first part of it, which was not ideal. Their meeting was not under the best of circumstances.
If I remember the story right, wasn't Meriwether Lewis kind of under some disciplinary action?
Oh, yes.
And his commanding officer then took him over, and that would be
William Clark.
William Clark.
Yeah.
And of course, Lewis and Clark, you folks that are really familiar with Howard Chandler Christie's painting of the Treaty of Greenville, both Lewis and Clark are in there. And I told Kate a little earlier, I also have a relative, my first cousin 7 times removed was William Wells, and he was the interpreter who had basically been kidnapped as a youngster by the Indians. Married Little Turtle's daughter, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And then his brother brought him back to the American side, and things developed, and so he's one of the central figures because he interpreted between the tribes and
fascinating.
So we both have relatives
right there
in the treaty painting. So continue on then. So Clark and Lewis and Clark get together. Like I said, Lewis was in a little bit of trouble.
Yes.
He was only 21. I think he caroused a little too much, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he threatened to kill his superior officer at the time, Lieutenant Elliott, which tell me, do you know what it means to demand satisfaction?
Sounds like something would set up a duel or something.
Exactly. Well, in court, Meriwether Lewis convinced them that he did not know what that wording meant and that he was sorry. So, but here in the 21st century, we know what it means.
Right.
So, but somehow he managed to persuade them that he didn't know what it meant. And
Okay.
he was saved.
Yeah, okay. So they've gotten together. That's how they met. And then that was in 1795.
Yes.
Did they kind of stay together as cohorts until Thomas Jefferson came calling?
Well, they did stay in contact. We do know that William Clark did visit Washington, D.C. several times, but we don't have an official count of if he met with Meriwether Lewis consistently. We just know that they did write letters back and forth in that time period.
And so that takes us up to around 1803 and a large land purchase, correct?
Oh, yes, the Louisiana Purchase. So it more than doubled the size of the United States, purchased from Napoleon Bonaparte. He was in severe war debt, so Jefferson took advantage of that, and Jefferson knew that he needed someone to explore this territory that he had just purchased.
Yeah, so this was 1803?
Yes, right around in there.
Okay,
Yeah.
so here we've purchased all this property in 1803, and Thomas Jefferson, who's one of my favorite presidents, you know, there's pros and cons to every president.
Exactly.
I always thought
Oh, yes.
Thomas Jefferson was one of our true leaders in the early days, and we're going to talk about some things a little later on, too. But anyhow, Jefferson said, hey, we need to see what's out there, and
Yes. So he asked his personal secretary at the time, Meriwether Lewis, to lead an expedition. But Meriwether Lewis, he was a very introspective gentleman, we'll say, and he knew he was not the kind of person that could lead men alone. He was more of a scientist. So he called upon his old commanding officer, William Clark. Jefferson gave approval, and they started the Lewis and Clark expedition.
Yeah,
And that's keeping it very simple.
yeah, that's very simple.
Wildly simplified.
That's wildly simplified. And there are no interstate highways back then, of course.
Absolutely not.
So anyhow, so they gathered, I think, at St. Louis, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, yeah, that was where the official expedition began. But a few years ago, they actually added the Eastern Extension, which now includes Ohio. Ohio is
really?
officially part of the Lewis and Clark Trail since that extension.
Okay.
Because Lewis and Clark met to start the expedition, actually, in Louisville, Kentucky, or Clarksville, Indiana. So the expedition now officially started in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and goes all the way to Astoria, Oregon.
Wow.
It's neat.
Yeah. Now, I know we could talk for hours about
Oh,
this.
yes.
But let's just kind of a synopsis for people out there, a summary of
Yeah.
what transpired over that basically two-year period of
Yeah,
time,
about two and a
correct?
half, yeah.
Yeah. Let's get a little synopsis of that.
Sure. So some of the goals of Lewis and Clark during the expedition were to establish trade and social relations with the native tribes. They were somewhat aware of what tribes they were going to be contacting, but they didn't have a good idea. So that was one of Lewis and Clark's goals per Thomas Jefferson. They also wanted to categorize and collect as many new animals and plants as they could for science. There were actually rumors of the Fountain of Youth and mountains of gold out
Oh, really?
there.
I always thought that was more down south, like Ponce de Leon
Right.
in Florida.
Right. Like they
Really?
weren't sure quite what they had purchased with the Louisiana Purchase. I mean, they even thought that there were woolly mammoths still out there on the plains. So that was one of the goals of Lewis and Clark expedition, was to disprove or prove these things. They were also looking for the Northwest Passage, which we now know did not exist.
Okay.
So that was a main goal of the expedition as
I was
well.
gonna say they were looking for a water passage all the way from the
Yes.
East Coast to the West Coast, correct? Okay.
Yeah. But they learned during the Treaty of Greenville how to converse successfully with the Native American tribes, because they found that a lot of the tribes here in the Miami Valley held a lot of similar values to those out on the plains. So they knew what language to use based on the Treaty of Greenville. They used the weather as a portend for how events were going to take place. They learned how to successfully navigate Native American culture because of their time here in Greenville. The expedition would have looked very, very different were it not for their experiences right here.
Okay. So they set out and they run into an Indian maiden who has lived in American lore forever, it
Oh,
seems
yes.
like.
Yes. Sacagawea. She's a very, very famous and well-known face, but the truth is she didn't really guide them so much as she was an interpreter. So it is true that without her, though, they would not have made it.
I was surprised because I looked some things up. She was really a young lady.
Oh, yes.
She was born in 1788, if I remember right.
Correct, yeah.
And so she's only like 16 years old, and I think she already had a child or two, if I'm not, had a child and was pregnant with
Right.
another one.
Well,
Did I say that right?
Well, she did have 2 kids, but
Had 2
Lisette
kids.
was born after
Okay.
the expedition.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, and actually Meriwether Lewis delivered her first child there at Fort Mandan in North Dakota.
Really?
Yeah,
Now, see, I
yeah,
didn't
he
know
was
that.
the doctor, as it were.
Okay.
So yeah.
When they got out there, did Lewis and Clark, did they split for a while before they came back together, or was that on the way,
Yes.
on the return
On the
voyage?
return trip. Yeah, on
Okay.
the return trip, they did split and part ways for a section, and it did not go very well for Meriwether Lewis
Yeah.
when they were split apart for that time, and so they did not end up splitting up again after that.
Yeah, and there were some tough times going out there,
Oh,
right?
yes.
Especially on the way out.
Oh yes, severe. They faced severe starvation several times, severe illness. The Nez Perce tribe actually considered killing them just to steal their guns, and if that had happened, we would have never known what would have happened to the Lewis and Clark expedition. But an elderly woman named Wakawis from the Nez Perce tribe convinced her fellow Nez Perce people not to kill them. So they were saved many times by Native Americans.
Right. So they make it out, and my
Mm-hmm.
gosh, there's the Pacific Ocean.
There it is.
Because they got there by way of what, the Columbia River?
Yes.
Okay.
So they had to traverse the Bitterroot Mountains. And that's where they discovered that the Northwest Passage did not exist. There was
Okay.
not an all-water route, unfortunately. But they ended up making more canoes, got into the Columbia River, and they passed all the way into the Pacific Ocean.
Okay. And then on the way back now, one of their main waterways was going to be the Missouri River, correct?
Correct.
Because that would take them back to St. Louis. Is that how they came back then, on the Missouri?
Right, yeah. Once they
Okay.
crossed the mountains again, it was a lot easier going on the return trip because the current was with them.
And so you said this was like a 2.5-year expedition.
Just about, yeah.
Wow, that's, I tell you, you had to be brave back in those days to take on a task like that.
Oh, yes. They had a very different mentality. It's often compared to the moon landing. The moon landing was easier, according to some historians, because we had contact with them the whole time that they were there. Lewis and Clark, they, after the first year, just accepted that they had all died. So when they reappeared, it was a good surprise. It was a pleasant surprise.
So they make it back, and they report back to President Jefferson, who I assume was still in office at that time.
Yes.
And then that really made it easier for succeeding expeditions and pioneers to start going out, because they basically had mapped the way.
William Clark, yeah. His map was only a few dozen miles off, which he was eyeballing the measurements when they were on the river. So William Clark's map was actually posted, and people would kind of come in and update it as things went. But he had the first cumulative map of that area.
Okay. Well, it's just interesting that they got together here at Greenville for the signing of the Treaty of Greenville. And I think it's great that you're able to put this together. And again, this is from the Treaty City to the
To the Western
Western
Sea.
Sea.
And on the back of it, we have the shield of the city of Greenville, because we are known as the Treaty City. And it just goes to show, like, historically, we don't have just Annie Oakley and Lowell Thomas. We also were the one-time home of Lewis and Clark,
That's right.
of national fame.
So if you folks are interested in this, I hope you certainly are, this is on sale here at the bookshop or bookstore or gift shop, whatever, here at the Garst Museum. And if you have questions you want detailed, this lady is the one to talk to because she knows her stuff. So thanks so much for going over that.
Of course.
What we're going to do now is we'll take a break here, and we're going to go out in the main part of the new edition here at the Garst Museum and talk a little bit about what's going on right now, because we have a definite theme show that's been going on until the end of May, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, Kate Clark and I'll be back in just a little bit here on Talk of the Town, and we'll go out in the other part of the museum here. We'll be back in just a minute. Back here at the Garst Museum, I'm Alex Warner, and with us is Kate Clark. And Kate, a big event or a big theme for the month of May, basically, here at the museum has been the American Revolution experience. And let's talk a little bit about how this came about.
Sure. So your local DAR, Daughters of the American Revolution, we have managed to get this display here. It's on loan to us. It's going to be here till May 29th. And you'll notice, if you look around here, you might not recognize a lot of these names when we start looking through these people.
Yeah, I looked at some of these earlier before we started filming, and I thought, wow, there's very few people, if any, I really know much about up there. And so the idea then, this is on loan from the National Chapter Daughters of American Revolution?
And the American Battlefield Trust.
Oh,
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how did we happen to come in possession of this for the month?
Well, the DR had to fill out the application, and we ended up getting it for twice as long as we had originally planned on getting it. We were very fortunate that we were able to have it for, I think it was 4 weeks total. So come and see it. It's got some really interesting information that is not widely known.
Well, it kind of goes to just a brief summary of what we have here. I mean, we talk about, the original colonies and so forth. We talk about the American Revolutionary War. But then we get into all this about, choosing sides and things of that nature. Just kind of walk us around a little bit, if you would.
Sure. So, like he said, you'll see a lot of different facets here from the American Revolution, and a lot of these names you may or may not recognize. So, right here on our first panel, you might recognize the last name Arnold. That is actually Benedict Arnold's wife, and she played a much larger role than a lot of people know in his betrayal of George Washington. And that theme continues around here. We've got Joseph Brant here and Thomas Kearny. He was an African-American patriot fighter. And we have, as you'll notice, many women as well. So these women played roles, and a lot of times where they weren't expected to be participating. You'll notice that a lot of these women generally didn't ask permission from anyone. They were determined to fulfill their role as they saw fit. And you'll find that that was also the same thing for a lot of Native Americans.
This was not only the Revolutionary War, but also started the feminist movement in the United States.
In a way, yes. And it was the same for Native Americans and African Americans too. So a lot of these names won't be well known because they were, as you would say, lay people. It's not George Washington, it's not Nathaniel Greene, it's civilians for the most part just doing their part. And that's why this exhibit is such an important piece of our history.
Mm-hmm. Now, I notice you've got some kiosks set up here. Is this kind of an interactive type of thing, or how's this all work? I see we've got like 3 or 4 of them set up here.
Yeah, so these different kiosks fulfill different roles. So this one right behind me, right here, it plays a few different videos, which kind of gives you an overview of the American Revolution if you're not as familiar. Now this one over here in the middle, it does talk about some of the more famous names such as Phyllis Wheatley. She was one of the first African-American female poets. It also has sections on Benedict Arnold and George Washington if you need some more information on them. And then this final kiosk all the way at over at the other side talks about what the different areas in the 13 colonies, how they contributed to the war effort. So the kiosks are very much so interactive, and they do pertain to different parts of the American Revolution.
I think it's interesting, too, there's a section on here, help from abroad, because without the help of the French, it might have been a different outcome.
Oh yes, and it wasn't just the French either. You have down here Bernardo de Galvez, and he was actually, I believe he was a governor for the Spanish, and they actually ended up getting involved, and they actually helped us with a lot of the battles that took place in the southern United States, such as Baton Rouge and Natchez. They were also fighting the British because they were allies of France.
Okay. Yeah, it's a great exhibit, and I know when I stopped in here a week or so ago when we first set this up, you're also having portrayers come in, if I'm not mistaken. There was somebody here representing, what, Fife and Drum Corps?
Yes, so we do have different members from the Sons of the American Revolution and Daughters of the American Revolution. The Sons of the American Revolution, or the SAR, have been very, very helpful and supportive of this display being here. So we have had multiple people come in dressed in colonial garb. And like he said, we did have a fife player come in and play his fife the way it would have been played during the American Revolution.
Now, for those of you out there that want to come and see this exhibit, you say it's through May 29th.
Yes.
And then the library hours are?
Library hours here.
Library, excuse me. We're at the museum. Museum hours are, what, you didn't know the library hours, did you?
I was like, I used to know those hours.
No, let's try that again. Let's say the museum hours.
Sure. So it's Tuesday through Saturday, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. So we are closed Sunday and Monday.
Okay. Yeah, so you folks that want to get out here to the museum, Yeah, get out here knowing that Sunday and Monday they won't be open. Anyhow, so this is the American Revolution experience, which I think is a great display for a lot of people out there. We're going to take a look in just a second. You've got some new exhibit coming in with Fort Jefferson, and those of you that have seen our shows in the past, you know we did a show on Fort Jefferson with David Cox and a couple other folks out there. So we'll be back in just a minute. We'll take a look at that, and then we're going to talk a little bit about a fundraising campaign that'll be going on out here at the Garst Museum. We'll be back in just a minute. Here at the Garst Museum with Kate Clark. And Kate, an exhibit that is currently underway deals with another historic area here in Darke County, and that's Fort Jefferson.
Yes, we're very excited about this new exhibit about Fort Jefferson. It's not quite finished yet, but that is simply because we are getting signage made. So we're looking forward to it being completed.
And so, of course, we have this painting of what Fort Jefferson looked like. What artifacts? I mean, you're going to collect a lot of different memorabilia, artifacts, relics, so forth, I assume.
Right. So our main ones right now that we've got here on display so far are actually some burnt timbers from the fort itself. So these timbers were collected via excavation, and they were preserved by Dr. David Cox. Well, now we have them on display here for the first time out in the open at the Garst, and we're very, very excited to have them here. And behind the closed sign, you'll see there is a little model of a building. That is what Mrs. Wilkinson's house would have looked like right there at the fort during its heyday.
Now, I noticed you talk about the burnt timbers. Didn't find too many nails out there because the nails ended up where? Do you remember?
I can't recall at the moment.
Yeah, those people from down in Dayton decided they needed nails, and they came up to Fort Jefferson when it was being deconstructed and basically took all the nails from the fort and took it on down, if I'm not mistaken, to...
It does.
And that's also from Fort Greenville, ended up the same fate.
I was going to say I knew about Fort Greenville. I didn't know Fort Jeff was part of that. But yeah.
So this is something to look forward to. I know we've got the Friends of Fort Jefferson have worked really hard down in that area to put things together, and so it's nice that you're going to have it up here. So.
Oh yeah, we're very, very excited. I mean, Fort Jefferson was built before Greenville was, so it was absolutely necessary for Fort Greenville to be made by way of Jefferson's existence first.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, well, we're going to slide over in another room here and talk a little bit about this capital campaign that we have coming up here, and we'll be back in just a minute. I want to kind of wrap things up today with Kate Clark here at the Garst Museum. And Kate, we're in what you said was like a combination storeroom and whatever else, multi-purpose. Yeah. And my gosh, we walked in here, I'm expecting to see this wide open space, and it is jam-packed with artifacts and historical things. So this is part of the capital campaign that we're going to talk about.
Yeah. So our capital campaign, we have a $1 million goal, and we're actually 40% there. So just a little background. To this point, we've been in the quiet phase of the campaign. Now we're opening it up to the public since we've reached 40% of that goal. And this room plays a big role into some of the goals that campaign has. One of those goals is that we would like to renovate the Lowell Thomas House for office space. Now this room right here, one of its purposes is that it's an office. So we actually have multiple employees that call this place their office space, and it's not really effective.
I don't know where they'd sit.
Exactly. So that's one of the goals of the capital campaign, is to get our employees some office space. Another goal of the capital campaign is to fulfill some personnel goals. One of the personnel that we are trying to hire, among three others, is a curator, who can kind of come in and get some of these items accessioned. Some of these we would like to have out in the museum. We want a record kept of each item, and it's as you can see, it's kind of overwhelming. So one of the goals of the capital campaign is to hire on someone who can come in and accession these items and be given the care that they deserve.
What do you mean accession?
So to accession these items would mean to take into account every single item, get measurements for it, find the history of the item, get down a record of who donated the item, how it was gifted, take pictures of every angle of the item. It's a process that per item would be wildly extensive. It would take years to get everything in this room accessioned properly.
This looks like my worst nightmare as far as getting ready for a garage sale.
I know. And that's why the capital campaign is so essential, is because we need this money in order to get all of these items accessioned properly.
And when you say items, I will assume, being ignorant, that everything is basically donated. The museum doesn't go out and purchase items of historic significance, do they?
Well, in certain cases they do, such as we are the National Annie Oakley Center. So some items typically related to Annie Oakley, we do make an exception for. So that would play a role in the capital campaign as well. But before we buy more items, we definitely want to get this room sorted out properly.
And there's a lot to sort. My gosh, I'm looking around, I see old pictures and portraits and everything of that nature, and I'm not sure what these are back here. It looks like King Tut, and I'm not sure how that applies to Darke County history, but anyhow, just a lot of stuff, my goodness. And so you say in the Lowell Thomas house, you mean the one in back?
Yes, yeah. So we got the Lowell Thomas childhood home, excuse me, out back. So it doesn't have air, it doesn't have plumbing, limited electricity. So what we really want is to get it renovated with those different kinds of amenities so that we can put the new staff that would be accessioning in here, their office space would be in the Lowell Thomas house as well, which would free up this room for more work-related activities within the museum.
Okay, I was going to say, they're going to be kind of out there by themselves then, won't they?
True.
Yeah, they're going to have to put in some walkways or something because they're sitting out in the middle of, well, not nowhere, but they're quite a far ways away from the main building here.
Yeah, it's not quite ideal having the staff separate from the museum, but we actually have grown so exponentially. We've been adding on a wing every 10 to 15 years because of all the items we have. And that's resulted in, well, where do we put the staff that's caring for this huge museum? We are a 35,000 square foot museum with over 300,000 artifacts. So economically, the best thing we could do is to move the staff into their own office space.
And so how do people contact you or whoever's heading up the capital campaign? Who do they get in touch with if they want to make a donation?
Sure. So you could reach out to any of our board members and they will direct you to me, or you can just call the Garst Museum at their phone number and you can, usually I'm here except for on Saturdays. All of those other days that we're open, I'm typically here except Saturdays, and I'd be happy to talk you through how you could commit a donation to the capital campaign.
And the phone number here at the museum?
It is 937-548-5250.
5250 for you folks interested, because the more of us that put money into this, the better it's going to be. And a lot of awards and honors have been given to the Garst Museum over the years.
Oh, yes. We've been voted the best museum several times, so much so, in fact, that our front door is covered in all of the stickers that we've gotten that recognize us as a huge place that really is committed to this part of not just Ohio, but on a national scale.
And you know, one thing people fail to realize is you think, like you say, the Annie Oakley National Center, and you think of Lowell Thomas, but there's so much more about the museum than just that. And the sad thing is, I know a lot of people from out of town take time to come here, but the people that live around the community who maybe haven't been here for a long time, folks, you need to get out here because it's constantly changing.
Oh, yes. Like I said, we add on a wing every 10 to 15 years, but there's more to the story than that. We have temporary museum exhibits that are constantly switching in and out, and we actually just put in a new exhibit for Lewis and Clark just this past February. So things are constantly growing, improving, changing for the better here. So maybe you came to the museum back in the 70s or 80s. It's not the same museum at all. It's much better than it was back then.
It's not your father's museum, right?
That is correct.
What do you have here? We want to show this, do we?
So this is the packet that I typically give to people who are interested in the capital campaign. So you would be meeting with me if you're interested, and I would give you this, and we would go over it together. So if you just open it here, this side tells the story. It's a little booklet about the story of the Garst Museum. And over here, we have a series of pamphlets that tell you about all of the individuals that are represented here in the Garst. Talks about Annie Oakley, Lowell Thomas, one of the race cars that we have here. A lot of really interesting and culturally important items here at the Garst. So, and I would be going over all of this with whoever was interested in the capital campaign if they decided to call and meet up with me.
Yeah, very good. Well, hey, thanks so much for taking time out of your schedule and everything, because this is basically a day off for you, I assume. It's a Monday you're closed.
Well, I mean, anytime I can do something for the Garst it's not work.
Okay. Well, it's been Caitlin Clark, author, capital campaign manager all-around good person for the Garst Museum. And certainly thanks for taking your time and making this such an interesting show. Hope you folks enjoyed it out there. Again, if you haven't been to the Garst Museum lately, let's get out here because it is very interesting. You could spend hours or you could spend days going through here and still not begin to hit most of it. Anyhow, thanks, Caitlin Clark. I'm Alex Warner, Nick Schmidt, our videographer. Thanks for watching this episode of Talk of the Town here at mycountylink.com as we continue to take a look at interesting people, places, and events that occur here in Greenville, Darke County, and West Central Ohio. Goodbye, everybody.